Today on Locked On Red Wings, Scott Wheeler of The Athletic joins us to profile Brayden Yager and Samuel Honzek.
You're Locked On Red Wings, your daily podcast on the Detroit Red Wings. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome back to the Locked On Red Wings podcast. We are your hosts, Brian Fisher and Scotty Bentley. I'm a podcast producer for the Daily J, a WWJ News Radio podcast. Well, Scott is the host over at Locked On Tigers, as well as a freelance journalist for the Detroit News. And today's episode is brought to you by Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off your first purchase. Today, guys, we are joined by Scott Wheeler, a writer for The Athletic, and he is going to help us profile 2023 draft eligible prospect Brayden Yager and Samuel Honzek. Scott, one, thank you so much for joining us. And two, how you doing?
I'm doing well. We were talking before we hopped on here, but this is kind of the home stretch for me. It's kind of a weird few days in the hockey schedule where everything I have that's going to run in terms of content before the draft has already been written and is scheduled and is sort of ready to go. And then really until I do my daily grades of day one and day two in Nashville next week, I don't have much else to do other than make some phone calls and fire off some texts. And I got a mock draft coming out next week, but the mock draft is basically done and there's just not a lot left to do. So it feels weird to be so close to the draft and yet have nothing left to write or say. And I'm just kind of waiting to break it all down at this point.
Do you just kind of like pretend to work so your bosses don't get on you? You're like, oh yeah, I'm writing up this story right now.
If I'm being honest, I've worked plenty in the last couple of months, so I'm not too worried about what my bosses think of my schedule for the next couple of days here before I fly to Nashville on Monday. It's been a grind. I was at the Memorial Cup in Kamloops, and then the Combine in Buffalo, and then right back here to write basically a piece a day between Buffalo and Nashville. So. I'm ready to go at this point.
Awesome. Scotty, if you're all right, we can just get right into things.
Yeah, let's do it.
All right. So, Scott, you're going to help us break down Brayden Yager and Samuel Honzek. Honzek.
Mm-hmm.
I'm going to trip up on that so much.
Honzek.
I'm sure I'll get it wrong like 3 more times before the episode's over. Don't worry. Let's start with Brayden Yager. However, he's a center, 6 foot, 165 pounds, according to elite prospects, at least. This past year, he wore an A for the Moose Jaw Warriors of the WHL, had 78 points in 67 games played. And Scott, a lot of the rankings that I see, given based on what Elite Prospects is showing me right now, have him anywhere from like the 15 range all the way to, I'm seeing Dobber Prospects rank him at 33 in the second round. That's a pretty big range. And that's something that Scotty and I have seen a lot this year. A lot of guys could go all over the place. When you're making a case for Brayden Yager, what is his case for going higher in the draft? What are his strengths?
Oh, there's a lot of them. For a long time, he was just known as that sort of direct attack at you in straight lines, attack off the wall into his shot type of player. That was his game. It was all about the curl and drag wrister. He's got a pretty smooth curl and drag wrister action in terms of getting pucks off. The release is quick. There's sort of pinpoint accuracy in his shot. So for the early stages of his career, right through minor hockey, he was a top prospect through minor hockey. And then right into the WHL, he was known as that scoring center, that player who could sort of attack off the wall and beat you from mid-range. This year, he really sort of tried to round out his game. He worked really hard to become an excellent two-way center in the WHL, and I think did so extremely successfully. I would say that he showed all sorts of smarts and detail in his game this year that was really important for him if he wants to prove that he can stick at center rather than as a winger, especially because his game to this point, to sort of predating this season, his game actually kind of looked a lot like you'd expect a winger's game to look, even though he played center. So for him to round out his game defensively this year, become a really solid two-way center in that league was a big deal. And then really the playmaking tilt started to shift as well. So it wasn't just all about looking for the shot and sort of attacking and sort of taking the puck at teams in straight lines. He started to mix in some creativity. He started to facilitate to his line mates a little bit better. And as a result, the goals maybe weren't there quite like you'd expect of a player who shoots it like he does. But there were other elements of his game that were coming along nicely. So really at this point, he's just that that sort of talented, committed, sort of well-rounded center, who's certainly the shot is still the biggest weapon. I wouldn't say it's maybe a top 5 shot in the draft, but probably a borderline top 10 shot in the draft, at least among the forwards. So there's a lot of intrigue there. The question with Brayden is, okay, is he going to be a center or is he going to be a winger? I think the expectation now is that he'll be a center. And then the other question is, can he get a little bit stronger? You run into him around the rink. I've bumped into him at a few events this year, the CHL Top Prospects game in Langley, just recently at the Scouting Combine in Buffalo. He's a pretty skinny kid. So there's some work to be done in the gym there for him just to get stronger and fill out. But other than that, it's a compelling case, and he's got some name cachet, and there isn't a scout who hasn't been watching him for a few years. So he's been on the radar for a while. He was always viewed as a top prospect in this draft coming up. It's a loaded class in the WHL, and he's been right at the forefront of that behind Bedard for a long time here. Has played well for Canada internationally, including last summer. So there's interest there. He's not, I mean, you mentioned a list that had him at 33. He's going to be a first round pick. Like, there's no question. I expect that once those sort of top 10 picks are called, if you will, that he's going to be at or near the top of most teams' lists, and that you can expect him to go in that 10 to 20 range.
Well, I am fascinated with just like player development and how it works in general. And like hearing you explain his season and then looking at the comparing like stat lines from last year to this year, right? Like you have, like you said, like the goal, he scored 6 less goals while in 4 more games. Like that dipped a little bit. The assists doubled, like literally doubled, not just like, oh, like they went up, like they straight up from 25 to 50. And is it just a mindset thing, I guess? Or like, what would you say are the biggest reasons as to the huge uptick in playmaking?
A lot of it comes down to approach. It's just, what are you thinking about out there? Are you thinking, I'm looking at the net every time I get the puck in the offensive zone? Because if that's what you're thinking all the time, then you're going to end up with high shot totals. You're going to be looking at sort of tacking straight into defenders and shooting through the feet of defenders. Or are you thinking, okay, I get the puck and I need to be using my peripherals. I need to open up my plane of sight. I need to be using the full offensive zone. I think that's what he learned this year, was how to use that a little bit better. I think he would have liked, he's told me, frankly, that he would have liked to actually have scored a little bit more this year, and that he's going to sort of maybe try to swing the pendulum back a little bit that way next year. But I think the expectations have to be pretty high for him next year. You have to hope that he goes back to the WHL and that he's one of those sort of 90 to 100 point players in that league. Maybe he works his way on to sort of into the conversation for the Canadian World Junior team. I think that's probably a bit of a long shot. But there is a chance for him to be in that conversation, to get invited to Canada's selection camp as an 18-year-old. He has 2 years of eligibility, so he could still play in 2025 in that tournament as well, but could be in the conversation for next year. So that's sort of what you hope for. And then down the line, I think the goal and the expectations have to be sort of second line center or second line winger, depending on the fit within the organization. If he's in an organization like Detroit, for example, is Marco Kasper going to be that 2C? And if he is, which of Marco Kasper and Brayden Yager would you feel more comfortable moving to the wing, and all of that? So that's a conversation for down the line. But I think you hope that he becomes a scoring second line player who can sort of play on the PP, can play a variety of positions, maybe even has some penalty killing value. He's a pretty smart kid out there. So that's kind of the barometer that I'd set for him.
Well, and the Red Wings certainly need scoring. So, I mean, there's no qualms about taking a guy who could put the puck in the back of the net. But, this is a really deep draft in terms of forwards, outside of even, your top 4, supposed top 4 guys of Bedard, Fantilli, Carlson, and Michkov. Like, there's some really talented players. And you said that you could see Yeager going from anywhere between 10 and 20. Well, the Wings have picked 9 and 17. So he could very much be on their radar. What is it that Yeager is lacking per se, that some of these other forward prospects have, that maybe he needs to work on to make, his value rise to NHL caliber?
I think part of it's the strength piece that I mentioned. Part of it's probably just, he doesn't really have a dynamic quality as a skater. I would say he's actually a very good skater. He's a smooth skater, but he's not a burner. He's not the guy who's going to turn defenders and sort of create breakaways. He's not Dylan Larkin out there. I mean, very few are, obviously, but that's just not his bread and butter. he's looking to, as I mentioned, sort of attack at you in lines. And I think if he could add some layers, add some more dimension to his game, continue to sort of round out his offensive arsenal, then suddenly you have a very, very interesting player. The talent is there. He can handle the puck. He can shoot the puck. He can pass the puck. He can skate. All of those sort of tools are there. It's just about getting a little bit stronger and maybe sort of continuing to develop a more multifaceted sort of toolbox, if you will, offensively.
We're joined by Scott Wheeler of The Athletic. We're going to take a short break, but when we come back, we'll wrap up the conversation on Brayden Yager, and then we'll move on to Samuel Honzek. Got to talk to you guys today about Birddogs. Scotty and I have been telling you a lot about these shorts recently, and that's because they're great. They sent us both 2 pairs, one a more cotton blend, one a more polyester blend. Scotty was wearing them yesterday while we were recording, in fact, and they're just comfortable and work in any situation. The stretch fabric that they're made out of means that you can wear them comfortably while you're sitting recording a podcast, making dinner, in the swimming pool, at the gym. I've done all of those things. And with the inline built-in boxers, they're just such a tight, comfortable fit that you don't even feel like you'll ever want to go back to your normal khaki shorts ever again. So go to birddogs.com/LockedOnNHL for a free Yeti-style tumbler with your order. That's birddogs.com/LockedOnNHL for a free Yeti-style tumbler. You won't want to take your bird dogs off, we promise you. Segment 2, Locked On Red Wings podcast. We are joined by Scott Wheeler of The Athletic. And Scott, you and Scotty, don't want to exclude Scotty over there, are talking about Brayden Yager right now. Scotty, I believe I asked the last question, so I think it's back to you, bud.
Yeah, well, I want to talk about the goal scoring specifically a little bit and just where his strengths are with putting the puck in the back of the net. Obviously, we've talked at length now about how he took a little bit of a step back in terms of that this season, but what areas, I guess, does he really specialize in? And just like the Wings are so, I asked this question to pretty much everybody at this point. Like the Wings are so desperate for goal scoring, like just a legitimate goal scorer. And I always just wonder with any forward that we cover, like what the chances are that this player can kind of fit that bill. So just in terms of goal scoring specifically, how do you see him progressing and what, I don't know, like heights do you think he could reach and where do you think he probably most likely ends up?
Well, I think you're hoping that he can become sort of a 50 to 60 point guy and that the splits will be relatively even. So if he's a 25 to 30 goal guy, that's kind of the end game for Brayden Yager, I think. In terms of how he does it, there are really two sort of big weapons in his arsenal, if you will. The first is the catch and release. You can hit him with a pass. He catches it smoothly. He gets rid of it quickly, scores a ton of goals in that quick catch and release action on the power play. And then the other is the curl and drag that I mentioned off the top. He likes to go at defenders. He likes to shoot through screens. He likes to adjust his angle right before the shot. And so on the power play, he's dangerous, both from the left wing and the right wing. I've seen him score beautiful goals from sort of mid-range home plate area goals on both sides of the ice, both face-off dots, if you will. So you're hoping that he can be a power play 1 guy, ideally. If not, he's almost certainly going to be a power play 2 guy. And then you're hoping that at even strength, you can get the puck into his hands, you can play him with passers. He's the kind of player who will thrive with a playmaker alongside him. We saw it this year with him whenever him and Yeager Furcus played together in Moose Jaw. So Yeager's obviously a second-round pick of the Seattle Kraken and a legit prospect in his own right, and very much a playmaker and a puck-dominant player. Yeager is not a kid who's going to have the puck on his stick all the time. He's not that sort of give me the puck, I'm going to carry it end to end type, but he'll play in give and goes. And then when he does get it inside the offensive zone, he'll make quick work of sort of getting shots through and getting clean looks. And he'll score a few nice goals a year where he goes bar down kind of thing from mid range. So that's kind of what you're hoping for out of him.
Cool. Scotty, you ready to move on to Samuel Honzek? All right. Sure. Samuel Honzek is center, 6'4", 185 pounds, big boy. And this last year with the Vancouver Giants of the WHL, he had 56 points in 43 games played, 23 goals, 33 assists. Scott, just go straight into it, what are the biggest strengths of Honzek, especially when we're coming off a guy like Brayden Yager, who's maybe a little bit smaller than him?
Yeah, I mean, I would but not to correct you here, but he has played almost entirely the wing, and I expect that he'll be a winger in the NHL. I know that in conversations with in conversations with NHL clubs at the Combine, and he told me this as much at the Combine, that he was telling teams that he's comfortable playing center and that he's okay playing center, and that if they want to move him there, then he's happy to do it. But his preference is to play the wing. So I think in the end, he'll probably be a winger long term. In terms of the skill set, just an extremely well-rounded player, really smart player. He can skate for his size. He's got a clean wrister, sort of clean shooting action, smart playmaking instincts, smart instincts off the puck in terms of getting open, breaking up plays defensively, tracking the play, sort of anticipating coverage, all of that. So just a really sort of smart, tactile player, plus the size piece is really interesting. I've spoken at length with the staff of the Vancouver Giants, both coaching staff and Barclay Pernetta, the general manager there, about him this year. And they could not stop sort of pumping his tires, and not just like you'd expect them to, but they were legitimately impressed. This is a kid from Slovakia who came over. His English was great from the get-go. He adapted really quickly to the North American ice surface, didn't have any issues off the ice in terms of adjusting to the culture, his bill at home, all of that. Just a really sort of smart, put together young man kind of thing. And then on top of that, here's a kid who's 6'4" and talented as well, right? So really intriguing package. You won't talk to an NHL team that doesn't like him. I think everybody's a fan of Samuel Honzek. The real question I think teams are facing is, okay, is he a top 20 guy or a top 10 guy? I think in the end, you'd be happier taking him at 17 than you would be at 9. But in saying that, he also told myself and my colleague Max Bolton in a conversation at the Combine that his best interview was with the Red Wings. So he felt really, really good about his interview with the Red Wings, and I think he could be a target for them at either of 9 or 17. For me, 9 would be a little high, just because you're probably getting a second line player, and I think ideally, if a top 10 pick, you'd be hoping to swing on a little bit more talent than that. But he was really productive this year. He was excellent right from the beginning on a Vancouver Giants team that didn't have a ton of talent around him. And if not for the laceration to his leg and the stitches and all that, and the time that he lost, could have had a really, really good season. He would have played at the top prospects game, which was actually hosted in Langley, which is the home of his Vancouver Giants. So I remember seeing him there in the walking boot and just how disappointed he was that he wasn't going to be participating and all that. So the injury played a part in it as well. But he's a legit prospect. I've heard comparisons to guys like Pavel Zacha. Pavel Zacha was a top 10 pick, and this year was a really important piece of a record-setting Boston Bruins team. So that's kind of what you're hoping for, is that sort of middle six, ideally second line winger who adds size and a little bit of a different look to a top six.
Absolutely. We're going to take another quick break, and when we come back, we're going to continue this conversation on Samuel Honzek. But first, I got to talk to you guys today about Gametime. Gametime is the place for last-minute ticket deals. Forget planning months in advance. Gametime has deals on tickets right up to the day of the event. Get exclusive flash deals on tickets for football, basketball, baseball, concerts, comedy, theater, and more. The Gametime guarantee means you'll always get the best price. If you find tickets in the same section in a row for less, Gametime will credit you 110% of the difference. It's the fastest growing ticketing app in the country for a reason. Get images of your seats before you buy so you know exactly what to expect when you arrive. Buy tickets in a matter of seconds, just 2 taps, and you're set. And they're sent directly to your phone so you never have to dig through your email. Snag the tickets without the stress using Gametime. Download the app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off. Download Gametime today. Last minute tickets, lowest price, guaranteed. Segment 3, Locked On Red Wings podcast. We're joined by Scott Wheeler of The Athletic. And Scotty, I believe the ball is tossed to you here leading into segment 3.
Yeah, well, I want to talk about the size specifically. Obviously, he's 6'4" and big. I guess just on the ice, how does he utilize his size? And because we've seen, I mean, even within the Red Wings organization, like it took a guy like Michael Rasmussen like years to finally kind of get more comfortable utilizing his size and kind of take those steps forward that were bestowed on him when he was a prospect. And I'm just wondering if he's kind of already at a point where he's utilizing his size really well, or if that's going to continue to be a step in his development, I guess.
Well, it's definitely going to continue to be a step in his development. He's not the main drive at you, push you
Sure.
into the net, power forward type. He's not going to bully you on the forecheck. That's not really Samuel Honzek's game, but he's not shy either. Like he's effective in puck control. He protects the puck out wide to his body really well. He doesn't just play the chip and chase game. He can hold on to it and take you one-on-one and delay and sort of play the game on the cycle and all of that. So it's a work in progress in terms of if you want him to be a power forward, if you want him to be a guy who pushes his way around the ice, then certainly there's work to do that way. But in terms of know-how on just knowing how to control the puck, knowing how to shield the puck from other players, knowing when and where to use his size, winning more battles than he loses, he's already right there. Like he's figured that piece of the game out pretty comfortably. So not worried about that piece of the puzzle for him at all, honestly. And I don't think that every guy that's 6'4" even needs to be the hit you into the stands type of player. Like I know everybody wants a Tom Wilson or Milan Lucic, but those guys are increasingly becoming sort of fewer and further between, if you will. So I just think in Honzek, you're just getting a really well-rounded, very mature game. And that's pretty rare in a player who's a teenager and has already played not just in success in the WHL, but has also prior to that played professional hockey over in Slovakia.
Gotcha. Scott, I want you to put yourself in the shoes of Steve Yzerman for a moment. And you're sitting there, let's say at 17, and both of these guys are on the board. Which player do you think the Red Wings should pick, maybe from a fit standpoint or maybe even just plainly a best player available standpoint?
I'm probably partial to Yeager. I've sort of been a little bit higher on Yeager than on Honzek throughout the year. I can understand why the Red Wings would be excited about Honzek, just the size piece, giving them a little bit of a different element. Yeager, it does have that sort of Lucas Raymond feel to him. Doesn't have the IQ that Lucas Raymond had at that same age, but just in terms of size and profile and the way that they both shoot the puck, and there are some similarities there. So I don't know whether you're in love with drafting a bunch of 5'11" guys. I mean, even Marco Kasper isn't the biggest guy in the world either, right? So I still would probably sort of argue. I maybe wouldn't pound the table for Brayden Yager, but I'd probably argue in his favor. I think there's a little bit more upside there, not just because of the scoring element that he has, but also just the two-way game and the fact that it's at a premium position and he's going to be a center long term. I know they've got Dylan Larkin and they've got Marco, but they could use more down the middle if we're being blunt in Detroit. So I don't think they need to. Certainly, they don't need to shy away from taking a center. And I think on that front, I'd probably go Yeager sooner than Honzek.
Well, I want to pick your brain about the current situation just in general with the Wings on draft night. And this is something that we've asked pretty much everyone we've had on, and Brian and I have had plethora hours probably at this point of debates on the topic of like they have 9 and 17 obviously, and Steve Yzerman just made comments probably 2 days ago, as everyone is listening to this, 2 or 3 days ago, where he had said that like if the draft happened today, he'd be picking at 9 and 17. And a lot of people want the Wings to either package those picks together to trade up or package them to trade for a, like solidified NHL player right now, like a goal scorer currently, and or use one of them or whatever it may be. And I just want to know kind of where you stand on it. This is obviously a very deep draft, one of the deeper drafts of recent memory. Having 2 picks in the first round is never a bad thing. Where do you kind of stand on that topic of what the Wing is standing pat just the way to go? They have 3 picks in the top, 45 or 50. Or do you think that it might be in the best interest to move one or multiple of them?
I'd hang on to them, play the long game, be patient. I was actually of the mind that a year ago when they signed guys like Andrew Kropp and tried to sort of move along the rebuild maybe a year sooner than I expected, I was of the opinion that they should have waited, that they should have let the team sort of sit in the bottoms of the standings for one more season, give themselves a better shot at drafting 3rd, 4th, or 5th in this draft rather than 9th in this draft, and really commit to one more year. I know there are complications that way. I know that for example, the ownership there wants bums in the seats, and that there was a financial piece to the puzzle in terms of moving it along a little bit quicker. But it did feel like it was just 1 year too early for me. And now I'd be of the mind that they've still got a ways to go, and going out and spending these two assets to acquire a bona fide NHL player may not even get you to where you want to be long term. So I think you've got a chance to add two skill pieces here. I think that's what they need more than anything. In guys like Marco Kasper that are coming, they've got well-rounded players. Carter Mazur's the same deal coming out of college. They've done a really good job finding those sort of middle of the lineup, middle six pieces, second pairing D prospects. They've got a lot of that coming. We know in Simon Edvinsson and Moritz Seider that they obviously have two premium pieces on the back end as well. Now they've got, I think that it's incumbent on them to find someone of high skill other than Lucas Raymond and Dylan Larkin, someone who can really move the needle. And because of this draft being as talented as it is at forward, there's a real opportunity here for them to find not one, but maybe even two of those guys. I know that there's also sort of conversations about them taking a right shot defenseman. And that could be an option for them at 9 and 17, more likely 9 and 17, I would think, if they like a player like Tom Willander. But I would be considering two forwards here, and sort of really injecting some skill into the organization, and then playing the long game with those guys. I'm not even sure whether Yeager or Honzek are either of those two types of forwards that I'd be targeting. I think they could be two players that the Red Wings like, but I'd be looking at players like Gabe Perreault of the National Development Program, or Zach Benson of the Winnipeg Ice, guys who can really sort of move the needle in terms of the skill piece, and maybe who aren't the typical Red Wings pick of the last few years.
Yeah, we can talk about it now, Scotty, because the mock draft Locked On NHL's picks 11 through 20 aired today. But Scott, we had done, all of the Locked On NHL hosts had done a mock draft picking for our individual podcast. And at 9, we took Oliver Moore. And at 17, we took Gabe Perreault, because in Scotty and I's opinions, like, the team still needs help down the middle, and they need scoring in a bad way. So those are two sections that this team just really, the Red Wings, like you said, have a long way to go. Right side defense, as you mentioned, is a huge need. Goaltending is still a huge need, in my opinion. I know Sebastian Costa is waiting in the wings, had a great year in Toledo, but it just feels like right now the biggest issue this team has is they cannot score goals. They're always in the bottom 5 in goals scored. And I know they're trying to also implement a new system under Derek Lalonde, but that's why for Scotty and I, when it came to this mock draft, we definitely took an approach to get offense, get as much offense as you can.
Yeah, and I think that's a sort of heady approach. Obviously, Moore would bring a speed element similar to Dylan Larkin. Moore without even having played in the NHL, would step into the NHL and be one of the best skaters in the league. He's the best skater in this draft by a wide margin, just an explosive freak athlete. So that piece of the puzzle, I think, could be really interesting to have Larkin and Moore sort of 1-2 or 1 and 3 down the middle, if you will, as with that kind of pace and speed, and could be an interesting dynamic. And then Perreault is one of the most gifted players in the draft. If he were there at 17 or at 19, or 17, 9 and 17, if he were there at 17, he is a player I would absolutely be slamming the table for. So a kid that I'm a big believer in. He's in the top 10 on my list. I wouldn't even hate him at 9. So yeah, the talent there with Gabe is high end. He's one of the most gifted players with the puck on his stick in this draft. He might be the highest IQ sort of offensive player in this draft in terms of the smarts inside the offensive zone. Certainly right up there with a player like Matvei Michkov. He's a gifted player and an extremely intelligent player. There are a lot of comparisons. Again, I hate to go back to Lucas Raymond, but there actually are a lot of comparisons between Gabe Perreault and Lucas Raymond. They were both sort of 5'11", not the greatest skaters, decent skaters, but not burners. Known for their smarts and their skill on the puck. So how many of those guys can you have inside your top 6? I think the answer is certainly they need more than just Lucas Raymond. So there's a strong case to be made for Gabe Perreault, I think. And he's a kid who's just sort of gone from a late first round prospect at the start of the year to becoming a very well-liked kid as a potential top 15 selection by the time we're making picks next week in Nashville.
Cool. Scotty, do you have any final thoughts or questions for Scott?
No.
Cool. Scott, thanks so much for taking the time to join us today and profile these two prospects. Where can people find you, and what are you working on? I know you said you're not working on much right now, but what will you be working on in the future?
Yep, at Scott C. Wheeler at The Athletic. We've got coming tomorrow morning. We've got well, I don't know when this will be aired or sort of dropped, but in the next couple of days we'll have my final thoughts column, sort of loose ends and notes throughout the year that I've gathered that sort of never made it into pieces, sort of little tidbits on a few players, some final thoughts on Matt Michkov, and some other sort of breaking news elements that I'm digging into. And then after that, I'll have my final mock draft the day before the draft on Tuesday of next week. I'll have a 2-round mock draft at The Athletic that will kind of be my closest full picture to the way that this is all going to play out. So always a sort of huge project for me, that one. So those are really the last two pieces of my content. And then on Wednesday and Thursday, I'll do pick-by-pick analysis. I believe there's 224 picks this year. And chances are I'll have commentary on about 200 of those 224. So really looking forward to that.
Awesome.
Beauty.
Looking forward to it, man. Thanks again so much for taking the time to talk to us. Scotty and I will be back with a new episode on Monday, so you guys stay tuned for that. Same time, same place. It's your team every day.
Every day.